Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. I'm going to talk in English now. I hope this is okay. My French somehow got lost during these years, and learning Italian, I somehow lost my French, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to talk now about the notion of intimacy in the work of Caccio Dominioni, and of course, it was very special for me that somebody came with a certain topic, and I had to somehow look at this work with a different kind of point of view and look what can be regarded as intime or intimate. And in the case of Caccio Dominioni, you would say it's not very difficult, but in the same way, it's maybe also the cliché, because he has been building for this very discrete social class, and the question is now, how can we talk about that in another way and also explain the characteristics of his architecture. So I started off with a kind of a layout or a table of content of what I would like to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk first about this kind of intime fantasie in Italian, and about this intimate relationship with the client Caccio had during his professional career. And then I'm going to talk about this kind of maybe intimate architectural language. And thereby I mean it's intimate, with intimate I mean not rational, what maybe also Raphael meant, saying an architect designing outside the dogma, or outside the, let's say, principles of rationality, who was maybe had an attitude which was very personal and private. And then I would like to end with the interiors that you probably know and which can be regarded very intimate. And these interiors are being seen in my thesis here as a result of the Sintesi delle Arti, or the total work of art, which I'm going to explain to you then in more detail. And then in the end, I would like to show you that these aspects of his works are all somehow related or grounded in the theory of ambiente, which is very important in my thesis and which somehow brings together all these different and seemingly not really matching aspects of his work. Okay, so I'm going to start off with this. This is a pictures we've been taking last year. Caccio Dominioni has become now 100 years old, and next December he's going to become 101 years old, so he's still alive. And as you already can see from this image, he's a noble and a wealthy figure in Milan, and this plays an important role in his professional career as well. So I'm just going to maybe say you some words about or some aspects of his biography. He was born in 1913 in a noble and a wealthy family, and this privileged situation is extremely important because it guaranteed a certain artistic freedom, since earning money was not very important and it was not the main purpose of his professional career. And also this kind of noble position helped him also to always find clients. So he did never, actually rarely participate in competitions where he once or twice won something, but then he was never capable of really realizing the project. So he was considered to be an outsider, but during his most productive time in the 50s and 60s, he was not so much of an outsider as we maybe would think now. He was very much, in part of this social elite, and he was working there and getting commission. He just didn't want to be active in the debates in this time. So you had people like Ernesto Nathan Rogers or Joe Ponti being very active and playing, like, let's say, the main role in this in the debate. But Caccio always preferred to stay in the background in public debates. And what is also important to understand maybe his career and his professional and artistic production is that the 50s and 60s are quite particular in the history of Italy. And maybe one can put this way. There are maybe two perspectives in the 50s that somehow are extremely important for Gaccia as well as for his clients. One perspective is looking at the past. So the past, in the 50s was somehow not this, it was very, let's say, how can I put that? It was somehow you looked at the past in a nostalgic view. In the same time, you were quite ambivalent because there was the Second World War, before there was fascism, there was the question of guilt, especially in the social elite. And then in the same way, the past was maybe also still pure. There was a kind of a clear idea of hierarchy that had a certain structure that was not being questioned by then. And then there was also this other perspective which was looking at the future. And facing the future was in the 50s and 60s very much combined with the idea of the advent of modernism, the economic miracle that would actually bring Italy from a kind of a rural country that had almost no industry and transfer it into an industrial country that was extremely rich and one of the most, let's say, economically spoken, very, very productive countries in Europe in the world after the Second World War. So these two perspectives somehow are extremely important to understand Caccia Dominioni's standing in this particular time. So if I start off with the question of the clients and who the clients were, so, you can say that the clients were mainly from the same social class. Gaccia started off with building for his family, that was already in the 40s, where he was able, for example, in this case, to build for his brother an interior, and then later on, family members and friends and colleagues would ask him to do interiors, and after that, he started with the first projects. And what is also very interesting is that already in the 40s, this close relationship with the client played a huge role, and there was something that even Joe Ponti points out in this image. You can hardly see it, but in this black table on the left side, there is a quote by Gaccia where he says, conoscere il cliente, il suo lavoro, le sue esigenze, le sue occupazioni, I suoi divertimenti, le sue passioni. So you need to know the client very well in order to build for him. So you need to have a close relationship, an intimate relationship, to be capable of making a kind of a second nature around this. And this is, of course, one thing that is very bourgeois and goes back to this understanding of the architect that is let's say, the architect of trust of a certain family, that he would build not only one house, but several houses for the whole generation, for maybe also the kids later on when they get older. So the architect was kind of a curator of the private life of the dweller, one could say. And this was actually also reflected when I went several years ago to Milan, interviewing the very old clients there and asking them why would they commission Caccia Dominioni for their homes. And they always answered that they wanted Caccia to sistemare la casa. And actually the right word would be to project the house, to progettare la casa. And I was asking myself, why do they use this word sistemare? And I also asked another architects, and they answered me that sistemare actually means more to bring in order, whereas to project is actually to design how we understand it. And so these families would commission Caccia to bring their life into order. That means that these families, you have to imagine most of them are quite rich, and they have a huge, collection of stuff, of arts, of goods, of tables, and so on. And when something is inherited from one generation to the next generation, Caccia was asked to bring this old stuff into a new order. So that was actually the idea of the architect doing in their houses. And And this can be seen in this first project I'm going to show you. And this is the Casa Pirelli. And Pirelli, you probably all know, this is Leopoldo Pirelli, the guy who built several years before, together with Gio Ponti, this extremely very well-known Pirelli Tower, also in Milan. This also tells a lot about the standing of Gaccio-Dominioni, because Gio Ponti maybe was more the architect of the progressive Italy, whereas Gaccio-Dominioni was more seen as the architect of the conservative Catholic bourgeois elite. So it's very interesting that the same client commissions Ponti for the Pirellone and then goes back to Gaccio for his own private residence. And this is this one. And if you look at it, it looks a little bit, let's say, rural. It looks very simple. You would never think that one of the richest and most important industrial family lives in this house. And it's a multi-floor house, of course, and the upper 2 floors, and together with the roof floor, was reserved for Leopoldo Pirelli with his family. And in the ground floor, there was another apartment, which we are going to see afterwards, where the vice president of Pirelli would live. And in between, you would have other employees or important people living there. So there was this, as I said, very close relationship. And of course, it had to be very discreet. Nobody should know that such an important person lives there. And this already starts off with this entrance hall. And you maybe see it a little bit. I don't have a pointer, but there is one stone a little bit loose on the right side. And this stone you could actually open. And behind that, you would find the bells to ring the doors. And then you would go in. And there is a whole choreography how you enter the house and how this house is also protected by the portier in the entrance hall. So you enter here, this is the image you've seen on the poster, and on the left side you have the window where the portier is looking outside, and then you go through these extremely organic forms towards the stairways. This again is the window for the portier. This is how the portier looks out of the window, overviewing the entering person. And then you would move slowly forwards until you reach this extremely beautiful stairway, which is almost Baroque. This is the glance backwards, and then here this Baroque stairway hall. And then here you have the floor plan, seeing where we move through. So on the right side, you see the entrance hall, and then you see in the middle this spine with the Baroque entrance hall. And then we are going now to move into this first ground floor apartment on the left side. And I'm going to show you this picture because the Pirelli apartment has been changed during the years, unfortunately. And but this one is also very nice to see. So you see, this is also an original interior by Gaccio. You see that he was capable of somehow bringing together modern furniture, which he designed himself. In the front, you see the sofa with this steel element, and behind, in front of the fireplace, you see the Catalina chair. This is also a design done by Gaccio. And then you see also this old furniture on the right side, or also, I mean, the books and the collections of arts, of course. And you also see that this floor plan already seems to be, is already very organic, and through these doors, which are parts of the wall, the floor plan is really fluid. So you can actually have different conditions in the space. So this is another view towards the dining hall. And then, of course, the plates, they play an important role. Of course, you collect them, you inherit them. They show, where the family comes from. And then, of course, I would like to point out this furniture on the right side, which was actually only designed as a black, glossy furniture to be the background of the white ceramic dishes, to bring them even more into the front. And then, of course, there is this second way connecting the servants' path with the kitchen. So this was this aspect that Caccia was asked to bring a new order into this old stuff and also combine these elements with new stuff and actually renew the interiors of these bourgeois houses. And another case which goes together with that, but is actually on maybe in turn and another very interesting example is the Palazzo Zucchi, which was built shortly later, almost in the same time. And this case is extremely interesting because the Zuccchis were not this noble family. The Zucchis were actually a family that had, let's put it this way, they were a kind of industrial family, but had a small firm, small textile firm close to Como. And during the 50s and 60s, in this economic boom, they became extremely rich. And maybe you know these textiles, you can still buy them now in Italy. And they commissioned Caccia because they wanted somebody who, is socially more important than them to become their architect in order to celebrate their arrival into the high society of Milan. So it was actually the other way around in this case, which is very nice. So she, Anna Zucchi, she was maybe from a more simple but intellectual family, and she had read from Caccia in magazines like Domus, and she wanted him to become her architect. And she had to convince him. So she had, for example, an idea of buying this beautiful palazzo, which was by that time already very, very exclusive in the center of Milan. And she wanted to have an apartment with a view to the garden of this palazzo. But then Caccia, of course, had another idea and convinced her to take the palazzo, the arm on the left side, which is extremely big, and actually is a kind of does not at all fit the understanding of dwelling of this family, but brings in a kind of a noble and very 19th century style of living with it. So it means that they needed to hire more servants in order to maintain the household, and I will show you afterwards. And they also had to buy new goods because this apartment, it's more than 250 square meters. They didn't have the material to actually furnish this apartment. So I'm going to show you this first image. This is the first hall of this apartment. And but what I just wanted to point out is that this procedure or this strategy is a kind of a practice of distinction per se. You buy something you don't need it in this way, but you only buy it because you can. And Caccia convinced them to do that, and they agreed because they wanted to go into another, or be accepted in another higher social position. So what is also interesting that they didn't have these antique goods as other families had. So Caccia would, in this case, go with them to an antiquarian furniture store in order to buy them their past they didn't have. It was actually the other way around. And these are some pictures of the palazzo. You see, you have several salons connected through an enfilade. What Caccia did is, for example, these inner balconies here, because on the back side he built in a kind of a mezzanine store for the bedrooms for the kids, and this is the connection. So you have actually a public line and then a very private line. This is the view backwards. This is the bedroom of the family, of the parents. You go up, and then here is the mezzanine, backwards, and this is one of those very exquisite salons. And it was not in this stage. This is everything. What you see here is done by Caccia. So he really implements a kind of a noble interior in order to give them another past. Yeah. And this is a very nice image showing Caccia Dominioni together with Cino Zucchi, baby Cino Zucchi, as it says here downstairs. And it also shows that after some time, they became really close friends, and this intimate relationship also worked in their case, even though the beginning were different. So social promotion through the choice of the right architect was very interesting. And another aspect which is very interesting in the work of Caccia Dominioni is this extremely, let's say, intimate architectural language, and language you hardly understand. It's not rational, it's extremely personal, and it's very private. And it has been considered to be like that already in the times when Caccia built. So this is a quote by Caccia Dominioni, it was given in 1963, and he says here, it can be that I am considered to be a romantic architect, but I have actually just liberated myself from bonds of rationalism. And I want to be an experimentator, and I don't care if there is a kind of a risk that I can fail, but I prefer the risk to fail than to adapt myself to a conventional expression. This is it's an important sending to understand his work. And now I would like to show you a project where you can see how these aspects come together. And this is the project Corso Italia, which was built in 1956 to 1961, and which has caused or has been discussed quite controversially in Milan by that time. As you can see, if you look at it, it's really irritating in many ways. So you look at it and you see these two vertical towers, and then you see in the middle this horizontal front window out of steel, and then you see in the ground floor these windows under these arcades. Another view, and this, somehow these two towers, they remind of maybe a kind of a medieval castle architecture on one hand, and then you have these windows that somehow have something to do with maybe a Parisian department store. And then, of course, you have, this is also a first drawing that somehow emphasizes this medieval or this extremely strange vernacular kind of architecture coming together with this kind of brutal horizontal element. And then what is also very particular in this case is this entrance hall. It's organic. You have this floor which shows the movement or kind of drawings of movement. And then you enter, here you have the port here again. You enter this hall and it becomes extremely precious on one hand, and at the same time it's really dark, and the aspects of a cave or a grotto are somehow very much emphasized. It's a kind of a interiority that you would hardly somehow expect in such a building. Another corner. So you see, there are extremely, let's say, outspokenly eclectic elements being combined together, and all of them seem to be actually quotes or reminiscence or ideas from different projects that have been put into a, not collage, but maybe in a strange combination or pastiche way combination of different, in a new whole. But this new whole remains somehow very, how would I say that? It's not a new whole, but it remains, the different parts remain visible. This is what I wanted to emphasize. And I think this has to do with something which I'm going to explain to you now. As I said before, this building particularly has caused some troubles in Milan. And for example, the architect Aldo Rossi, who was by that time editor in the Casa Bella Continuità, he writes about this building. When we look at this last house of Caccia Dominioni in Corso Italia in Milan, we have the feeling that everything is a problem of ambientamento. ambientamento, and it is not resolved if we just import kind of an atmosphere of Portofino in Milano. So he just makes also a bit fun of it, that something strange is happening here. So what does he mean by that? What does he mean by the word ambientamento or ambiente, and by the idea of Portofino, maybe? Rossi, as I said, was editor together with Ernesto Nathan Rogers in Casabella. And what is interesting is that Rogers, from the beginning of his editorialship, wrote Continuità above Casabella. And he did that because he thought that Casabella alone would be a too banal title for a program of a magazine. So Continuità expressed very much the new program of the magazine. And continuità did actually not mean just simply a linear continuity of history, but it rather meant actually a historic, in the kind of a historical sense, I would say. And in this sense, it meant that that in the city you would find all the different historical layers in the same coevally, as in the same moment. If you go into a city, you find all the different layers of the past at the same time. So this was the thing that he meant by continuità. And then he also invented this word you probably all know, preesistenze ambientali, or ambiente of the city, which was actually for him the expression of the history, the physical expression of the history of the city. So Rogers asked the architect to involve with history and design the project as part of the history. So that is what he meant, and he himself then very much attributed or said or wrote that Gaccia's project were the proof of the correctness of his theory. For example, in this case, he writes about Gaccia Dominioni's project that it's a kind of a lucky infill or a lucky understanding of the preesistenze ambientali. And you all know probably also the Torre Velasca, that somehow also is kind of, a design that tries to look at history in a very particular way and design this tower as part of the historical layers of the city. And somehow, you probably all know this neo-liberty debate that was actually caused by this building and also other buildings. And this was not really understood. So this kind of poetic interpretation of the history of the city was extremely difficult to understand for outsiders. But there was a group like Gaccia, but also Ernesto Nathan Rogers, but also others that were very much involved in this kind of understanding. And so this building I showed you before, the Corso Italia, has to be understood also in this way. Okay, and I'm coming now to another aspect of his work, which is also very interesting and maybe also explains this interiority or this intimacy you feel when you enter the work of the building of Gaccia Dominioni. Gaccia started in the 50s a collaboration with the artist Francesco Somaini. And Francesco Somaini was a sculptor from Milan. And here in the image you see actually a study of the floor plan that was then actually realized in the entrance hall of Corso Italia. And Francesco Somaini had more or less the same age like Gaccia, and he was a leading member of the group called Movimento Arte Concreta in Milan. And this group was very much interested into a new understanding of art as an integral part of architecture. And they were looking actually for a new spatial work of art. And a kind of a role model in this Movimento Arte Concreta played Lucio Fontana, another artist you probably all know. And he actually also formulated before the Movimento Arte Concreta the idea of a new spatial art. So they were actually very much interested in a new total work of art and invested a lot of time how to find new means by which they could implement them in residence. And what I show here is quite interesting because it's, you can see these kind of conventional stuccos on the wall, and these stuccos were painted with fluorescent light, and then they also with fluorescent paint, and then also lighted with a neon light, and together that must have, somehow be kind of very particular and very like a, if you take drugs, I feel that it must have been very special. So this was a kind of a first attempt to bring, art into the house again and to make it integral, not just only as a kind of extra element you put into it, like if you use a painting and hang it on the wall, but to use actually the, one element and charge it with art. What he also did, Lucio Fontana, was he was very interested into floors, because also floors are integral parts of architecture, and by seeing floors as art form, you would actually very easily then somehow bring art into architecture and then create a kind of a new spatial art form. And this is a very nice study he did, and which has a lot of affinities with the work of Francesco Somaini later on, or in the same time. For example, this is then a work Lucio Fontana could realize in Gantoux, where he actually did this, could realize this floor plan, and where you see that also this topic of movement played a role, and it is very it's a kind of archaic, but same way maybe also very particular design that somehow makes this palazzo building, this Palazzo delle Esposizioni, a kind of a public space where people could gather and have a kind of a platform that is artistically especially valued. And then shortly later, between 53 and 59, Caccia realizes quite a similar project together with Francesco Somaini. And you can see he also invests a lot into this floor, and this floor is actually in the technique of terrazzo. You have these small marble patterns they would put into the floor, and then they would make it very soft. And these designs, they show somehow the movements or the motion of people going through this galleria. So there is already a lot of affinity, and there is another drawing made by Francesco Somaini, and this one is in the possession of Caccia Dominioni still, and it shows also this close relationship between those artists, and it shows that Francesco Somaini was very much interested in aspects of motion in art. He has also in his sculptures you see aspects of motion, and it seems that this painting is somehow a frozen kind of movement. It's very, very baroque and very dynamic in the same way. So one of these theses, or one of my hypotheses, is that that these aspects of movement or motion that interested Somaini a lot somehow were taken over by Caccia Dominioni, and that's one of the reasons why Caccia's floor plans became very organic after a certain period of time. So this collaboration dured 18 years. And in the beginning, before the collaboration, Gaccia's floor plans are quite rigid, and of course he had already been using these topics we all know. And then after this collaboration, he starts to become very dynamic and very, very similar in certain respects to the artwork of Francesco Somaini. And this can be seen in this project, Piazza Carbonari, which was built during 1958 and 61. So what is also interesting, maybe before I go into this project, is that this idea of the total work of art was quite important for Gaccia Dominioni, because it gave him the framework within which he could try out aspects of modernism. You know, you have to see that modern architecture for his clientele was kind of, you know, they had a lot of reservations towards modern architecture, because modern architecture seemed to me, for them to be, you know, a little bit too rigid, too serialized, too industrialized, and it lacked them a certain kind of culture for them. It also lacked this kind of leisure this architecture also sometimes expresses. So they had a kind of a reservations towards modern architecture, but still in this period they also wanted to become modern. They didn't want to have these extremely noble and classic interiors anymore. So Gaccia was the architect who was capable for them to offer them a kind of a variant to the modern architecture that they had seen in magazines, and which was white and which was extremely, you know, reductive in their view. So, this Sintesi delle Arti, or this total work of art, was a kind of a framework within which Gaccia could try out to modernize architecture, and at the same time to distance himself from the upcoming consumer society, where of course also again seriality and industrialization and, you know, huge series of the same product were possible, and which were not interesting for this social elite. So the family Mondelli, who is here in this case the client, they had bought this plot, and this plot was by that time a little bit outside of Milan. Of course, it's in the center of Milan now, but by that time it was a little bit outside. And this was the villa standing on this plot in this period. It was a kind of a villa that was okay, but in their eyes it was too uncomfortable, because the kitchen was in the underneath, and you know you needed a lot of servants in order to maintain the household. So it was just the other case actually compared to the one of the Palazzo Zucchi. So in this case they wanted to have a modernized home, and also they wanted to engage Gaccia Dominioni because he could offer them a solution that was modern but not too modern. That was the thing they expected him to do. So here you see actually pictures just when this house was finished from '63, and you see this neighborhood was considered to be not such a good one, and there was still some, barracks on the plot and so on. And for Elena Mondelli, the client, the only reason why she was, she agreed to move out of Milan was that Gaccia would actually build their house. So, as I said, it's a modern and a prefabricated frame structure seemed for the clients of Gaccia to be a reduction to a necessary, and the minimal was an expression of a lack of culture and knowledge. So in this case, we have a frame structure, and Gaccia Dominioni could easily could easily build, larger windows, transparencies, what we usually would actually associate with modernism, but he did not. He chose to clad the building with ceramic tiles that are somehow very similar to glaze, or to glaze, but in the same way they're also not transparent. So this was a material that interested him a lot, because it was somehow different to the materials you knew in Milan. By that time, now you think that in Milan there are so many ceramic tiles, but this was maybe the second ceramic house in Milan, and Caccia was the one who could convince a firm to produce these tiles in Zurich. And he started to use them because they had many comparable. These ceramic tiles had kind of many comparable structures or characteristics to glaze, and in the same time it would cover it, and it would give the precious content a kind of a artistic skin. And what he also chose is to make the outside, the facade, very abstract. And if you look at the artwork of, for example, people like Manlio, who were also active in the Movimento Arte Concreta, you see maybe there are even affinities between this facade and this abstract understanding of art. What is also interesting is that the ceramic tile correspond or interact very much with the surrounding. That means that you have the light reflecting in the facade, you have the environments being reflected there, and somehow through the light this house is charged with the special condition surrounding the house. And it is also very interesting that in 1949, Lucio Fontana invented the so-called ceramica spaziale, where he put a kind of a glossy surface on a strange sculpture out of ceramic. This one is quite kind of small, but his intention was also that this ceramic tile would then shine and reflect the light and be charged through reflection immaterially with the surroundings. That's very interesting, that there is a lot of affinity again with the work of Lucio Fontana. So looking at this house, another futuristic element one can see is, for example, the elevator. And you see this elevator is open, and if you are there, you would see how the elevator moves, and it comes out as a kind of a futuristic element, and it then disappears underneath this bay window. And you also have to know that this visible elevator is not for the dweller, but it's for the servant. So the dweller is still not seen, but the servant can be seen. So there is also this hierarchy still there. So this is this elevator as a kind of a science fiction element on the facade. And then we come to the interior, and what you see in these floor plans is that the frame structure allowed Caccia to build individual homes for each dweller. That was also interesting, that modernization, rationalization, and industrialization becomes here, in the case of Caccia Dominioni, the precondition of a unique floor plan, which is actually, you would say, a contradiction. But in his case, he uses it to make unique pieces of dwellings. So then, what he also does is that he sees this project as a kind of a prototype. He builds it several times. Here, in the case of Ippolito Nievo 28, here he uses the same elements, the same motifs in the facade with this aluminium frames, and then the glazing, and then the ceramic tiles. Also, the in this case, it's another one where this prototype is being used. But within this framework, again, he was capable of creating each apartment individually. And in this case, for example, you have a huge range of different apartments, and this is also due to the fact that these apartments were owned and not rented. So then the family Mondelli, which was actually the client, they only they built it, but then they only bought the 2 upper floors. This is 1 floor belonging to them. And you can see also that the floor plan seemed to be in motion. You have on the right side, you have the main halls and the dining room, and on the left side you have the children's bedroom, and then on the left side, on the upper corner, you have the kitchen and the bath of the servants. So what you also see is that the whole bourgeois program is somehow fitted into a not so big floor plan. So this fluidity of the floor plan is also due to the fact that you had to press somehow everything into a kind of a small or smaller, in this case, area. This is a nice image of one of the interiors where you see the family actually has celebrated parties. These are images that shows how this apartment was used in the beginning, and Francesco Somaini also in this case was commissioned to do the floors. You can see them a little bit, and then you also see the fireplaces with the frames. That was also done by him. So this idea of this total work of art was realized. And what is also very nice is that the tapestry is done out of this satin textile, which had the color of tobacco. And the idea was that everything was into a same little bit darkened ambiente or atmosphere. And this is how the apartment is now. This is the entrance hall. You enter it, and what you can see here is a little bit a darker entrance, and you move from the darker entrance towards the light. This is the elevator opening directly into the apartment. On the left side, you have the interior corridor leading to the private part of the apartment. And then you have here this main halls with on the left side, this chamber kind of spaces that can be closed with doors, but also in this case the doors are more part of the wall than doors as we know it. So also this idea of motion is somehow has also something to do with the doors and the movement of the conditions of the floor plan. So this is the view backwards. And what is also very nice is that these reflections of the light through the floor plans, and so they play a big role in this apartment, and they give maybe kind of a important atmosphere to this apartment. It's kind of not dark, but it's not really open and filled with sunlight, but it's a little bit tuned down. So these glossy points, they play a role. Okay, so that was a little bit quick, and I apologize for my language, and I hope that you have now many questions that we can find into a discussion. Thank you.